Yeah, it's connecting.
And I assume it notifies your subscribers too, right? Did
I
you get a
think
little
so. I
alert?
think
Okay.
it probably, because I've seen them come up before in the notifications.
Yeah, I have too, and I wasn't sure if it's like, oh, live. We're live.
Hi,
Yay, this is
everyone.
so exciting. Hi everybody. This is our first Substack live. Hopefully first of many. I'm excited to chat.
Me
Um
too. This is
so
going to be
I'm
fun.
I'm Virginia, and I have a Substack called What's Left, and it's mostly about interior design, but with a really specific emphasis on vintage. I wrote a book called Big Thrift Energy that came out a few years ago, and I sort of view my Substack as an extension of that. I love to talk about not just styling vintage, but shopping vintage. And that's what I think we're going to talk about today. So Emily is joining me. Emily, talk about your fabulous Substack.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So, hi, everybody. I'm Emily Stochl, and my Substack is called Pre-Loved. So, I'm a vintage and secondhand fashion reporter, and I've been hosting the show Pre-Loved podcast for the last 7 years, which is kind of crazy.
Gosh.
And I cover all things vintage and secondhand fashion. So we do interviews on the podcast, but I also write about vintage and secondhand fashion topics on my Substack. And so I'm really excited to talk about thrifting and what we're excited to find this year.
Yeah, well, one thing I wanted to ask you, Emily, I guess before we start talking about what we're looking forward to thrifting, is I take it you're like me and you've been like vintage shopping for a really long time. Do
Mm,
you find it funny seeing like this sort of new generation of people? I guess they approach it in such a different way, right? Like when I was growing up, vintage was, I don't know, it wasn't like people didn't turn their nose down on it, but you had to have a lot of patience. It wasn't necessarily like cool, I guess, to shop
yeah.
vintage.
Oh my gosh, it's changed so much. Like I think a lot of people around my age started secondhand shopping. I don't know, like I got my driver's license and my babysitting money, and I'd go to the thrift store and I wanted to
Yes.
find like weird, cool things that I could wear on a budget. And that was something that only like artsy kids really did at my high school. And even when I went to college, I feel like there were not many people that were secondhand shopping. I distinctly remember when the Macklemore thrift shop song came out. I think that
Oh
was in
yeah.
like, I don't know, 2012 maybe or something like that. And so many people sent that to me and they were like, this is so you. And I'm like, I'm the one person that loves thrift shopping. And it's changed so much, which I think is awesome. Like it's just grown and grown. And I think it's only going to continue to grow so much more.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I've noticed I do a lot of estate sailing, and the vibe at an estate sale is so different today than it even was like 10 years ago. I mean, I used to be the youngest person at the estate sale, and now it's like there are not just young people, but a lot of younger guys, specifically through like
Mm,
looking for fashion stuff. And like
yeah.
they know what stuff is, they know what sells on Poshmark. So it's a lot more competitive these days, I think.
It is. And I also tell people, because I know some people will say, oh gosh, the thrift store isn't what it used to be. And like, that's a whole conversation. And it's
Totally.
changed so much. But at the same time, I do want to remind people that in some ways it's more accessible than it ever was. Like,
Absolutely.
my 14-year-old self could have never imagined that I'd be able to search online and find literally anything that I was planning to buy new secondhand already available. And like, easy to find, and that's just getting easier and easier. So yes, it has changed a lot, but I think in some ways we have like even more options than we've ever had.
Oh yeah, and even at like thrift stores and estate sales, there's always stuff left over, right? This idea
Oh my
that
god.
if somebody buys something, then you're not going to find something is crazy because anyone who's ever done a Goodwill donation run knows that we have so much stuff. Like I have more stuff than I know what to do with. So certainly everyone else does too.
So much stuff, it's
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Okay. So let's talk about what we're looking forward to thrifting in 2025. I think I have my little list of items, so I guess
Okay,
I'll start and we can just
go
go back
for
and
it.
forth one on one. So really everything that I chose kind of falls under this one banner, which is ugly chic.
Oh,
And
I
I
love
talk about
that.
this in my Substack. I think and I hope that the pendulum in fashion and interiors is swinging maybe away from like minimalist, beige, sad beige home, as they say on TikTok, um, and maybe swinging more into a maximalist direction. And I don't mean maximalist with just like throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. I'm talking about like considered maximalism and adding something that would maybe not be your first choice or the first instinct. Alison Bornstein talks about the wrong shoe theory, and I talk about like the wrong art theory.
I
Picking a
love
piece of
that.
art that's maybe like not what you would think, right? If you have mid-century furniture, you don't have to do mid-century art. You can do like a Victorian painting or something, and that can be kind of fun. So that's my first thing, is just looking for those pieces that maybe other people pass by. I think art is the best example of this. But even with fashion, I mean, I love like jackets. That's my favorite fashion piece to thrift because I always find incredible like 90s and 80s weird jackets. So that's my first thing I'm looking forward to, is just in general ugly chic stuff.
I love that so much. I love the wrong shoe theory, but applied to interior decor. That's so cool. Okay, so my first one, I'm on a vintage coach kick at the
Okay.
moment, and what I am determined is to find my next bag at a thrift store because most of my vintage coach I've bought online, which
Okay.
again is like really great. You can go out and seek and find it, but I'm determined to find it in the wild. I did a post on Substack about the vintage coach bags that I have and what I was searching for. So recently I wanted just a really big leather tote bag, like particularly one that could fit my laptop in it and I could use it for work and things like that. And I was looking at a Coach duffel sack and I talked a little bit about why I ended up going with instead a large legacy shopper bag. But now I'm trying to decide what my next one will be. I'm thinking about maybe the Soho duffel. And so trying to like decide, and what I do when I'm trying to decide what coach bag I want to find is I go through archives of like the old catalogs,
Uh,
particularly the 90s ones. I love just flipping through the catalogs because you can see how they're styled, which is like one thing about shopping secondhand online is it's an e-commerce photo, like you're not seeing it on the body. So like how does
totally.
the bag wear? Crossbody? How long is it going to be? Things like that. So I love looking through the old catalogs.
And are
But
you
I want to
buying the
challenge
catalogs?
myself to I'm sorry.
Are you buying the catalogs? Like, are you finding them on eBay?
Oh, they're digitized.
Okay.
I'll send you. I've got in my Substack post about Vintage Coach. There's been like incredible archivists who've gone and like digitized all these old Vintage Coach catalogs, and it's such a good resource if you're into Vintage Coach. But yeah, so I, flip through them and I kind of make my wish list of like what I'd be after. And I feel like vintage coach is something that you totally used to find in the thrift store and you don't really find it as much now, but you do sometimes. And so I'm just like manifesting that I'm going to have a stumble upon moment where I find that dream bag.
There's something about like the tactile nature of thrifting and estate sailing, like actually finding it in person
Yeah.
is so exciting. It
It's
feels
like
like buried
joyful.
treasure. It's joyful, totally. I mean, that's what's like addicting about thrifting to
Yeah.
me, is that feeling of like, oh my God, I got something, that nobody else has, or something off my bucket list. And I really like, you mentioned you looking for a bag that fits your laptop, which is so funny to think about because like oftentimes when we're talking about vintage, they
Yeah,
didn't have
seriously. It's like from
laptops.
1997. Like no one was carrying their laptop to work.
Yeah. But I really like the idea of looking at the old catalogs, because that's something else on my list. Is one of my favorite things to thrift for, and I have two of these, is vintage Architectural Digest coffee table books. I have
Cool.
two that were published in the 1970s. One is called Celebrity Homes, which is a really fun one, and one is called American Interiors. And they're so inspirational to me because I often will leaf through them and see items, like actual items that I found at thrift stores, like a lamp that's kind of weird or like very, 50s, but I see how they styled it in the 70s, or how, Joni Mitchell in the Celebrity Homes book, how she had it in her home. So I think that's like something that people don't often think about, because like you said, one of the big challenges of shopping vintage is figuring out what to do with the item, whether it's a home item or a fashion item, because, you know, I don't know
The
how else would it be styled.
visualization.
Yeah, often in the thrift store, it's like surrounded by, kids' backpacks or like an old thermos or something. So you're not sort of seeing it in the way you would at like a Neiman Marcus or something. So I think like looking for those vintage inspirational images, vintage catalogs, vintage books, I think that's like a really interesting idea.
I love like the Instagram accounts on here, like Simplicity City. Oh, we're not on Instagram Live, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Simplicity City, Cabmate, like accounts that round up old like 90s fashion photography, or there's
Yeah.
one that's like airport style looks, and
Oh
it's
yeah, I love
just
that. And like
so,
celebrities in the 90s, like Julia
yes,
Roberts with the
chic and
jeans.
relaxed and just it's very cool. And so I way prefer to look at that kind of inspiration than, scrolling and you see the same inspiration that everybody else has seen, you know?
Yes. Yeah, I think the pendulum always swings with everything. So, like, everything we've seen for the past 10 years, I'm hopeful that maybe we'll swing in a different direction, maybe not so minimal. I also think it's interesting, you mentioned the laptop bag because, like, so many of the fashion substacks I follow obviously are not geared towards vintage. And a lot of them talk about the Row, for instance, which
Mm,
is known for their, like, huge bag that you can fit your laptop. And it's gorgeous and stunning, but, like, we
yeah.
can't all afford, a $4,000 bag. So I think it's cool to sort of look at like current things that we want and then try to figure out how we could replicate that look with a vintage item. That's
Yeah.
oftentimes like the original item, right? Like I'm
It
sure a lot of
is.
the Rose pieces are, maybe inspired by like Calvin Klein in the 90s or whoever.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I've interviewed on my show vintage dealers who were doing this, in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and they talk about how designers, they still do it, but it used to be so much more common. Designers were one of the biggest customers for these vintage dealers, and they'd come out and they would buy pieces to have for design inspiration, and they'd have
It's the
incredible
same with the furniture
archives.
industry. Yep.
Yeah, and they would build like these incredible archives, and like you just know Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen are vintage lovers, like
Oh,
they for
right.
sure are looking to vintage pieces for inspiration.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool idea. Okay, so my third thing, I guess, then is I'm really interested in looking for pieces with patina.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
and like actual patina, like verdigris, I think is a really big color that we're going to see, like that green, and that's something that you see a lot of on like copper pots or
Mm,
candlesticks. And I think with vintage furniture in recent years, especially on like Instagram and TikTok, we've seen a lot of upcycling and people, cleaning things. And I kind of like buying stuff and not doing that. Like I kind of like if it's vintage, I like you to be able to tell that it's vintage and that it has some age. And I think that can be fun in maybe in jewelry too, to a certain extent. So for me, I guess it's that color, that sort of green color, and also like this idea of like embracing an item's natural patina, I guess.
Oh, I love that. I feel like that is very in line with what vintage people, fashion people are into right now too. Like I talked about how we're seeing interest in vintage pieces that have wear or that have visible mending or customization or things like that. Like those are very popular. And I love to have a piece that's got like a little wear and tear on it because it's something that someone clearly loved and wore over and over and over again. And now I'm going to continue to give it life. So I love to
Yeah.
see that too.
I love that. That's really big, like in the jeans world, right? Like
Yes.
Japanese
The
denim
wallet
that's been,
mark.
yeah, that's really cool. I have one of my favorite vintage fashion items is this really cool 1940s yearbook jacket. So, and it's very Bodhi. Like that's another
Mhm.
the fashion line Bodhi. Everything they do
Oh,
is
is it senior cords? Like where they drew on it?
it's yes, they drew on it, and it's not corduroy, but it's a jacket. It's like probably like a linen cotton blend jacket, but I mean, it's got everybody's handwriting. So I have to be super careful. I like have to get it dry cleaned and wash my hand and everything. But it's so fun and cool, and I think it's from 1944. It has the high school on the back, and it says 44. And I got it probably 10 years ago, and that was before Bodhi like blew up. And now if this jacket was on Etsy or something, it would be, I don't know, $1,000 or something. I got it for like $10 on the antique gallery.
I
But I love
love
that
that.
because it's like, it hasn't changed at all in all of these years.
It's a print magazine, so I can't send you a link to it, but there's this great magazine called Mildew Magazine that
Okay.
writes about vintage and secondhand fashion. And for their first issue a couple of years ago, I did a piece about the history of vintage senior courts. And that tradition originated in Indiana. And I interviewed this vintage dealer who's from Indiana, but he travels like the country. Like he goes out to Rose Bowl, he goes to Brimfield and sells his senior courts everywhere. And he told me, he was like, I'm not taking credit, but he told me that Emily Bodie bought a huge lot of his senior cords.
Oh, that's
And
really
he was like,
fascinating.
I know that those designers were buying them for inspiration. And it's so true. Um, that personalization, like, there's just something to that. It feels really like, I don't know, it feels really special and sentimental.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny to think about, like, if you just figure out how to search some of these online marketplaces, you can find stuff that's pretty much Bodhi, just,
Yeah.
produced in the mid-century rather than, yesterday, and you can get it for pretty inexpensive, like senior cords, for instance.
Yep. Letterman jackets, anything like that. I love
Oh,
this stuff.
yes. Okay, what else are you looking forward to thrifting?
Okay, so I'm headed to New York soon to do some coverage for the Manhattan Vintage Show. So I'm
Ooh,
starting to
fun.
make my wish list for that show. I'm also a big jackets and blazers person. So
They're the
I don't
best.
know, I kind of want like a good like herringbone blazer. Like a blazer is something that I would never buy new because the vintage ones are just so much cooler and I like the fit of them so much more.
Same.
Um I'd also really like to find a rugby shirt, like just a bold striped rugby shirt. And I know if I don't find that at the thrift store or at the Manhattan Vintage Show, I can find them at 10 Foot Single by Stella Dallas, which is a New York vintage store that I love. And I mean, they have everything under the sun, but like I know that they have a whole rugby shirt section. So I can go through and have my pick of all the different colors. And so I'm working on my shopping list for that trip. And I like to have a vision in mind of a couple things that I'm looking for so that I don't just buy leather jackets, which is my go to.
Yeah, I hear that. Do you like make like Pinterest boards, or do you have like a notes app, or is this all just in your brain?
I do a notes app. So I try to like write it down. And again, like I try to remind myself if I walk in and I find something great, I'm like, ooh, was it on the list? Like, if it's really, really great, I may still have to get it, But like, if it wasn't on the list, did you want it before? Or did you just want it because you walked in and you saw it and it was so great? I
Oh,
mean,
totally.
it happens all the time, but it is nice to have that just to like keep me honest.
Yeah, totally. I also think it's fun when we're talking about jackets because you mentioned you won't buy a new blazer. I notice with me, and I'm sure it's the same with you, because of my knowledge of vintage and my collection of vintage that has stood the test of time, I shop for new things very, very differently. I notice this a lot with fashion because so many brands now are using polyester and poly blends, even the really expensive ones. And that's sad because you can go to the thrift store and you can get like a silk blazer or a wool blazer, for like $10. And then and I mean, I've bought stuff from the Frankie shop, but like they're making, $300 blazers or 400 or 500 and they're polyester.
Yeah, I did a post about how there was this like mango coat that was being advertised as like a wool coat and it was
Okay.
$300 and I looked at it and it was like the tiniest bit of wool, mostly polyester. And it's like you can find, I don't know, I have in my closet, I found at a thrift store for less than $20 a Christian Dior like wool and cashmere blend, Phil Blast. Like you can just find incredible coats and jackets and they're high quality and they're meant to keep you warm and you're going to have them forever. I just would never buy something like that new.
Yeah, and the difference is so obvious even in like so many of my vintage jackets, they're lined, they're lined in
Right?
silk or they have the logo printed all on the inside. You don't see that anymore.
Or with blazers and suiting, they have extra seam allowance. So if you need
Oh,
to take
yes.
something out, like a sleeve, or you need to make the size bigger or make the size smaller, they've already got that seam allowance built in because it used to be that we would just tailor things to fit our bodies and wouldn't necessarily expect them to have to fit off the rack. And they were made to keep in mind that you might change through the years that you were holding on to that piece and loving it. And so those pieces have that option built into them already.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Okay, so another thing I am looking to thrift is velvet. Velvet
Ooh.
furniture specifically. I love velvet. I hope that velvet is the new boucle, which we saw so much of in interior design recently. I just am like really into texture lately, and they did a lot of velvet in like the 70s, and maybe it looked very 70s then, but I think there's a way to sort of style it that's more fun. I also think velvet can be fun in fashion too. I guess we equate it with like holiday dressing maybe a little bit more, but
But
a
like
velvet
think
blazer is cool.
90s, think
Yeah,
like, Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
totally.
Well, something that I should totally get your advice on is my husband's opening a coffee shop,
Oh my god,
and
that's
so I
so
get the very
cool.
fun job of like decorating the coffee shop with beautiful vintage things.
And
And
drinking free coffee all day.
exactly, exactly. It's perfect. But he's really into like European cycling, so like the Tour de France and things like
Oh,
that.
I
So it's
love
gonna
that.
kind of have that like French, and you can think of like I'm sure you see these in design, but like retro travel posters
Yes,
or
I was just gonna
retro
say that.
like
Like, I'm sure
tour
you could find some
posters.
really amazing Tour de France posters somewhere.
Or even like merch, like the bike hats or things like that. So like I'm kind of starting to, he's like, you can't start buying things for it yet because we're still like very much under construction. There's nowhere to put it. But I'm gonna be like this spring really kind of looking for a lot of like bike France travel vintage decor themed kind
That's
of stuff.
really cool. There's a restaurant, it's a Mexican restaurant, and it started in Atlanta. It's called Super Rica. It's like one of my favorite restaurants, but they have a location in Charlotte as well, and I think also maybe Winter Park in Orlando. But anyway, they have these light fixtures that I'm sure the interior design company made, and they look like they're made of like deer antlers, but if you get
Cool.
closer upon further inspection, they're made of bicycle seats, like vintage bike seats, because
Cool
it kind
stuff.
of mimics, which I just think is so cool. So you can maybe even do something like that with like actual bike parts or like chains, or I don't know. I'm not a bicyclist. I don't know what all comes in a bike, but pedals or something, you could probably make some like really interesting sort of art sculpture or something.
Yeah. I was thinking that something that would be fun to do is how I think actually they don't do it anymore, but you know how in Paris there's that bridge where people would put the locks on
Yeah.
them? I was like, that would be cool, like if I did, I don't know, like a piece of fence, metal fencing or something, and then like people who travel and visit could like put a lock on the wall, because it's
Oh,
like
that's a
bike
great idea.
themed and Paris themed. So I thought that could be a really fun. I'm not super crafty, but I was like, that's a DIY I can manage. I just have to find a big piece of scrap metal that
Oh,
people
right.
can lock it to.
That's cool. I love that. Okay, so then I guess I've sort of gone through almost everything except another trend that I'm excited about, and I don't totally know how I'm going to put this into my own space, but I am excited about color drenching.
Ooh, tell me
And
more.
I like so it's like the idea of, matching the carpet to the drapes, so to speak.
Okay.
Like literally doing everything in not necessarily one color, but variations of the same color.
Oh,
So
like tonal kind of.
tonal, yes, tonal
Yeah.
dressing, which has been pretty big in fashion for a while. And I
Yeah.
love that look. I think that can be really fun. But I feel like we're like starting to see more people push back against just like the beige and the farmhouse and embrace more color. And I think it's fun to, I don't know, pick one color that you love and sort of do like almost everything in a room or in an outfit, that
That's
variation.
fun. I
Whether
love
it's
that.
that
That
color.
sounds
Yeah.
really fun. That sounds good. Are you working on, like, any renovation projects right now that you have all these ideas in mind for?
Um, well, so for one thing, I sell vintage. I sell vintage on Cherish and have done that for a number of years. And that's like a side hustle and just an excuse for me to buy things.
Exactly.
Because I can get rid of them. So it's not
You
like
can
I'm
play through someone else's style.
exactly. Um, So I'm always buying and looking. I am sort of trying to come up with ideas for my primary bedroom.
Cool.
Um, I just have white walls and I'm really into texture. I mentioned I love velvet. I would like to do some type of like linen wallpaper or something with like texture. Um, I just think that would be really fun. I have played around with the idea of wallpaper. I'm really into my bedroom being like my sacred space and I love
Oh, see.
sleeping. I get a little nervous about making it feel too claustrophobic with like a crazy pattern or too much crazy color and then like waking up in the middle of the night like, "Oh my god, this is, giving me nightmares or something." And I would like to redo both of my bathrooms. I have two bathrooms. But yeah, so
When you
not
were
really.
talking about the textured wallpaper, do you remember the show Trading Spaces?
Yeah, of course.
It made me think of, like, that one such iconic Trading Spaces moment where
Where
they
they
put
hated
hay
it
on the walls or,
and
like,
they hated it.
straw
Yeah,
on
right.
the walls. It
Because
stays in
who
my
wouldn't
mind.
want straw on their walls?
It's just stayed in my mind, like, that they put straw on that poor person's walls.
Yeah, I guess I could try
Give
that.
it a shot. Maybe you could make it stylish, who knows?
Maybe, I doubt it. Anyway, what about you? What's something else?
Well, I'm also always just looking for vintage jewelry.
Oh, yeah, same.
So
Same,
always
same,
vintage
same.
jewelry shopping, and it's a nice and easy one to pick up on my travels, because like you can always find. I wear clip-on earrings a lot,
Yep,
so I'm
me
always
too.
looking for things like that. But very into, I mean, I know this is really popular, but like charms, or I love like when someone has taken vintage charms and then rebuilt them into a new charm necklace or something like that, or a bag charm. Again, anything with that personalization, lockets, anything that has engraving, like I don't mind if it's got someone else's photo in it. Like I'm just all about that and those special moments.
Yeah, I write in my book about vintage portraiture, and I say,
Cool.
like, not your grandpa, not your problem, because you can just like embrace somebody else's grandpa. And I think that's kind of a similar idea with like a vintage heart charm or locket or whatever. I love vintage jewelry too. I'm really into vintage Alexander Calder
Oh,
jewelry, which is like obviously, unattainable because it's like at Met or whatever. But I have found at like flea markets and stuff pieces that look, very
cool.
similar with like the spirals and things. So I try to look that way. When you search online for vintage jewelry, do you have any like designers that you're looking for?
No, I'm mostly looking like that's where I go full magpie eclectic
Yeah.
mode. Like that's one category where I really let it just speak to me. Because I don't know, I feel like such a romantic I'm a Cancer sun. I don't know if you
Okay.
can
I'm
tell.
an Aquarius, so I'm
Yeah.
just like a weirdo.
I just get like so emotionally moved by a piece of vintage jewelry. And so like that's one where I'm like, it finds me and it's like I'm pulled to the piece a little bit.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of a mix. There are vintage jewelry designers I really love. I love Robert Lee Morris, who did a line with the Olsen twins. We were talking about the row
Oh
earlier. He
yeah.
did a line with them. I don't know what happened to it, but I remember that. And you can find his stuff. Money's is another brand that I really, really love vintage wise. But my favorite place to shop for vintage jewelry is antique malls behind the
So
glass.
good.
I have found so many incredible things. I'm actually working on a Substack post about this because I think so many people are so scared that everything behind the glass is expensive.
Oh, sure.
At antique malls it'll say like ask for the key
Right.
for 134 and people don't do it because they're like, "Oh, there's also like pressure, right? It's weird when you ask
Yeah.
for the key and then you look at it and you're like, "Oh, I don't want this. Now I have to like humiliatingly say, never mind." But I found some, like, incredible, incredible things, for very inexpensive. I think most of the stuff behind the glass is just there because it's
It's
tiny.
small.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they don't want people to walk
exactly.
away.
Ooh, that's exciting. I'll look for that piece to come out. That's like that's I love an antique mall. Love it.
Me
I'm in the
too.
Midwest. Like I love just a big sprawling, like not a chain. It's all just like everybody has their incredible booths. That's where you find the treasure that like you didn't know. No one knew what that was and it would just happen to be there kind of pieces.
Yeah, and also because they tend to be more curated, obviously, than a thrift store. Sometimes you can find one booth that really resonates with you, like, that one person who you don't even know who they are, but like you kind of have this weird design crush on them because every time you go, it's like, oh my God, they totally get me. I like everything in their booth.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Love
Yeah.
a
Is
good
there anything else that you're looking forward to thrifting?
I would like to find a pair of white, like paint splattered overalls.
Oh, I love that.
And I feel like white is other than for painters, like white isn't a kind of overall that you see super commonly. Like I'm here in the Midwest, so like usually in my thrift stores, I do have pretty good options when it comes to like overalls, workwear, denim, stuff like that. Like stuff that was legitimately worn by someone's grandpa on the farm turns up there. So I have really good ones. Like I have the key pinstripe overalls, and
Oh,
I
wow.
had a pair of overalls that was like threaded to bits. And I had a friend who's a quilter, like do quilted patches on it for me.
Whoa, that's amazing.
But I want to find a pair that's like white and either someone wore it as a painter, so it has paint splatters on it, or like I think that could be a fun DIY to do.
That's
And
a
I
really
mostly
cool
wear
idea.
overalls. Like I'll wear it as an outfit, but a lot of times I'll wear that if I'm going to Brimfield or I'm going to like a big vintage flea market show where I'm going to be like out in a field walking around, overalls, coveralls, something with like big pockets so I can have like my notebook, my wallet, my podcast microphone, like all that stuff on me. That's like my uniform look for out in the field reporting.
Yeah, you need, like, some, like, cargo pants and, like,
Yeah.
stick all your equipment in all those little
Exactly.
pockets.
Or like at flea markets, like dealers always have like the kind of like the Home Depot like belt that they tie
Yes,
around that's got all the deep pockets. Like that's me like trying to do that look so I can have all my gear on me.
I love that. That's really fun. That's cool. Well, I also wanted to ask you, are you wearing anything vintage? Are you wearing
Oh,
everything vintage?
everything's vintage, of course. This is a like '90s suede leather jacket that I got at the thrift store. This is
Beautiful.
the vintage. I love vintage graphic tees, so
Me
I think it's
too.
a soda brand. I got this at 10 Foot Single by Stella Dallas. Vintage earrings. Yeah, what about you?
Yes, my top. This is a vintage Halston, silk top, and
I love vintage Halston.
it has little H's all over it, and I
How
got it at
good
a
is
thrift
that?
store for, like, $5, which is
How good is
crazy.
that? Oh,
Yeah,
I
I
love
live
it.
in Florida, and I live in Northeast Florida, which is an amazing place to thrift and estate sale because people aren't as familiar with, like, designers and labels as they are in, like, West Palm or Sarasota, which are
Sure.
also excellent places to go vintage shopping, but very expensive, very, very expensive. Like, the restores down there, they know what they have. They've got the first dibs prices printed out on the chair. They're selling it for the same price, and people will buy it because there's a lot of designers and stuff down there. But here, it's like, we still have the history. There were a lot of places that, neighborhoods that sort of came of age in the mid-century, and so people moved here then, and there's still like all the fun Palm Beach Regency vibes. It's just I think you could find more hidden gems here than you can,
More
especially
deals.
affordably.
That totally makes sense. That totally makes sense. I do love to hear about people's like regional secondhand shopping experiences
It's
too.
fascinating. It's fascinating because like I've noticed I love estatesales.net. And I will often just for fun, like look up a city I've never been in, which is kind of a tease. And like, I don't necessarily recommend it because you'll just be sad and want to like travel to that place. But I love looking at Detroit, for instance, because, Detroit came of age in the mid century with the auto boom and everything. And there's like insane, all those estate sales have the most insane art, insane mid-century furniture, like super high-end collectible stuff that we don't necessarily see in Florida because we see more like, I don't know, 60s and also like a lot of 90s in this part of the state. Still really cool stuff, but maybe not with the history of like a Detroit. What is it like? I don't know where you're based. I know you
I'm in
said that it was
Iowa. I'm in
okay,
Iowa. We have a really good, I would say, like, the nice thing about Iowa is it's a lot of undiscovered, like, I people will ask me things like, "Oh, where do you like to thrift in New York?" Because I go to New York a lot for work.
right.
And I don't thrift when I'm there, because I'm never going to find a better deal than I'm going to find
Yeah.
here in Iowa. That's where I go and I like buy something special. Like if I'm on a
Yes.
trip, that's where I go and I buy something special. Detroit is
Or get
incredible.
inspiration.
Yeah, Detroit's incredible for vintage. I grew up in St. Louis. St. Louis is really
Oh,
incredible for vintage, and like that's such a if you've never like done a Zillow search of like old St. Louis homes, like so good. So good. Beautiful homes. Um, but yeah, I'm a big like Midwest vintage supporter.
yeah. Yeah. I think I often get comments from people saying like, "Oh, you must be thrifting in these like really high-end neighborhoods." And I don't. I mean, I find that it's better to thrift in places with history,
Yeah.
neighborhoods that were established in the 40s or 50s or 60s or wherever, because people have lived there for a long time, and so when they downsize or they pass on or they move, they're donating their stuff to the local Goodwill, whereas in some of the more like new upscale neighborhoods, I just find a lot of like Pottery Barn,
Yeah. Yeah.
like
That's not what I'm
suburban
after.
stuff.
I want to go through like your grandma's farmhouse and look for
Yes,
those kinds of things.
exactly. Well, is there anything else that you're looking to thrift?
I think that's my wish list. We put the
Okay,
good
well, I
vibes
guess
out there.
before we end it, I wanted to ask your best thrift find ever.
Ooh, best thrift find.
Yeah,
Well, I think the Christian Dior coat that I told you about, that was a thrift store find, and that was incredible. I found at an antique mall a vintage 70s Gucci bag that was like only
amazing.
priced for like $80 or something like
Was it
that.
like logo or?
No, it's brown suede with like the red and green stripe, and then
Oh, so
like
you knew what it was
I
when it was up.
knew, but it wasn't like logo monogram or
Right.
anything like that. Um that was an incredible find. Like in terms of just like found in a thrift store type
Yeah.
environment, like those are. What about you?
Oh, I have a Goyard trunk that I got at a thrift store for $90, which is
Crazy.
crazy, crazy, crazy. Well, I mean, lightning doesn't strike twice, but I'm still looking for a Birkin.
Who knows?
That
Literally, like stuff.
was the best. And
Yeah.
it was so funny because I was with my grandmother when we got it, and it was this like mom and pop sort of thrift store. And they were like, make sure you look in the shed out back because we went in the store and it was just like a lot of wicker stuff. And so we went in the shed out back and I saw it and it just said old trunk $90. And it was, I mean, it's logo, like it's
Yeah.
fully, it says Goyard and it's huge. It's like 4.5 feet tall. You open it, there's drawers inside. So I had it authenticated. It's real. It's amazing. Another good one I have, you brought up your Dior. I have a really cool floor length Dior cape that I got at a Goodwill for $10. And I knew it was Dior because the whole inside is lined like CD
Mhm.
with silk. And so it's like floor length cape, it's wool, it ties here. It's such a fun piece. And it was just like in with the coats, and
Yeah.
I'm sure nobody knows what to do. Like most people are not wearing a wool cape, especially in Florida. So, I
You
don't know
just
that.
never know what you're gonna come across.
Never. That's what's so fun. Like I mean, we're talking about the things that we're looking for, but the truth is like I'm going to find something I'm not looking for
Yeah.
that's going to be the most amazing thing, right?
So true. So true. The
Yeah.
true treasures.
Yes, exactly. Well, this was really
This was
fun.
so fun. Thanks for
I think that we
having
need to do
me.
this again like in a month and do the best
Totally.
thing that we got.
Yeah,
The most
maybe I can
recent
show
one.
you what I got at Manhattan
I
Vintage
would
or
love that.
okay. Okay.
Yeah, maybe we can
Do
just
the
do like
same.
a full fashion one and I can
I
like look for
love it.
stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, cool. It's a date.
Okay. Thanks everybody
Amazing.
for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks. And I guess this will be recorded and everything too. So
Super cool. I love testing this
Amazing.
out with you.
Yes, it was so fun hanging out and nice meeting you in
Talk
person.
soon.
Bye.